My name is Owen Symes, and welcome to The Copagandists, a podcast about cop shows and the people who make them. Last time, we discussed the question of realism on Dragnet, both how it was accomplished on a technical level, and also how the show's particular interpretation of police work differed from the real job. We hinted that these differences might indicate an underlying ideological message. What ideas, in other words, might account for the show ignoring some facts in favor of others. To answer this question of ideology, we should organize our thoughts along three primary questions. What was Dragnet telling its audience? Was this message intentional? How did audiences react? Once we answer these questions, we can begin to understand Dragnet's lasting political legacy. The message, the what, of Dragnet is relatively straightforward. Are you ready for this? People should trust institutions, especially the police, who are fundamental to civic life. That's basically it. This idea of respecting institutions wasn't new in the 1950s. People with the resources to make, or at least fund, art have long found such a conservative viewpoint appealing. But we should recall that only a decade before Dragnet first aired, the Great Depression had sapped many of their faith in the nation's institutions. In fact, as Claudia Calhoun argues, it really wasn't until the experience of the Second World War that the majority of people in the U.S. came once more to trust that the machinery of their society was functioning properly. For Calhoun, this renewed institutional trust manifested itself culturally in the popularization of the police procedural as a distinct genre of television. Quote, "The successes of war mobilization in the United States led to increased confidence in the efficacy of government and other large-scale institutions. The police procedural expressed this new, distinctive confidence through its understanding of the efficacy and necessity of law enforcement agents. The police procedural, then, is not a Cold War genre, but a demobilization genre, or rather, a remobilization genre. In the explosion of police procedurals across mediums, we see the emergence of an ideology in which American democracy is possible only through the management of individuals, communities, and cities by an organized police force." The pro-police version of this institutionist position can best be summed up by the political liberal and former LAPD officer Gene Roddenberry. In August 1953, Roddenberry wrote to Earl Stanley Gardner, the creator of Perry Mason, a show about a defense attorney that always made mincemeat out of the police. He defended policing as something fundamental to organized human life. I quote it here at length because it's an erudite articulation of a view that many within and beyond the precinct walls share. Quote, "The extremes of conduct possible in human affairs are infinite. We manage to exist collectively only because we set up and enforce certain rules of conduct. These are, of course, our laws. We promulgate these rules of laws not because men agree on ways of conduct, but because they do not agree. Law is an artificial standard which marks the limits of activity beyond which certain society is injured. Law, standing alone, is a fiction. It achieves reality only when it is observed. In other words, law enforcement is an elemental, basic part of life together. Of course, in some states it's militaristic type of law enforcement, in others totalitarian, and in others democratic. I believe it could be proved, and can be proved, that even the tribal leaders of the Pacific Islands have their followers who enforce the laws that the leader makes. Roddenberry, however, goes further than claiming merely that the police are a professional necessity, like postal workers or doctors. Indeed, he thought that without the cops, society itself, and all those ancillary jobs, simply could not exist. Quote, "In some way, it must be demonstrated to people that law enforcement is an integral or basic component of man's government by man, that it is not merely another modern convenience like garbage collection and sanitation, etc." Parenthetically, do we really think that the guys upholding the speed limit and making sure minorities aren't loitering, while, okay, occasionally botching a drug raid or killing a pet dog, are these guys really more important to society than those anonymous heroes who wade through literal shit in order to keep the plague at bay? Is this really what people like Roddenberry think? Okay. Roddenberry ends this missive with some other thoughts on how the police might convince the public of these philosophical truths. He was skeptical that the police themselves would be able to be rhetorically effective all by their lonesome. They would need help from an outside agency. Quote, "It's been said that it's up to we police to do that kind of selling, but frankly, I wonder if we really can. In the first place, our motives will be suspected. It will appear that we're trying to build a police empire, and secondly, our words do not reach out very far. We seldom have direct access to the magazine, large television programs, and other media of communication. Thirdly, and most important, this type of thinking is bound to meet with a great deal of resistance. People just will not believe that the cop on the corner fills any larger place in society than giving traffic tickets, catching criminals, and so on. They refuse to believe that he is a symbol and a fact of collective existence, and refuse to believe the function he represents is really very important." Fair play to Roddenberry, he's right. I don't believe any of that. Happily, all of these problems attendant to direct police messaging, people suspecting their motives, their communications equipment being meager, and their direct communications being met with resistance, could be surmounted or avoided altogether by a nationally broadcast, privately run television show. Well, what do you know? Now keep that phrase, a police empire, in the back of your mind. We'll return to it in our concluding remarks. Now, granted that Dragnet ended up portraying the police as intelligent and effective professionals, it stands to reason, however, that this could have happened somewhat accidentally. Jack Webb said his intention was to present the police realistically when he set out to make the show. Was it really his intention also to make them look good by doing so? Well, yes. TV Guide sat down with Webb for an interview a couple decades after Dragnet premiered. By this time, of course, the police had come under considerable fire, sometimes literally, as the tumult of the 1960s roiled across the United States. In that context, Webb told his interview, quote, "I've always felt that the policeman has been the underdog of society. Part of what he became was due to the indifference of the public. When you do police stories, you're talking about every policeman in the United States, if not the world. I think when a policeman needs all the help he can get in today's rather distorted sociological scene, you have to help him. You have to tell the truth about him. I think there's so much to be said beyond constantly tearing down." In other words, Webb had never been interested in criticizing the police. He wanted to tell the truth, sure, but he presumed that this truth would be a laudatory one. He considered it axiomatic that police behavior would, on the whole, be worthy of praise. And conversely, he assumed that any undue criticism of the police must, as a matter of necessity, be harmful to the institution itself and the product either of indifferent ignorance or antisocial malice. And we don't just have to take Webb on his word. We can also see the intent of the show at work in how it reacted to real-world events. A number of times throughout Dragnet's run, LAPD Chief William Parker had Webb craft episodes addressing specific political issues. He wanted his point of view presented to the viewing public, and Webb willingly obliged. I will cite two examples here. The Season 7 episode, The Big Evans, and the Season 5 episode, The Big Ruling. To understand The Big Evans, we first need to be reminded of the Bloody Christmas police abuse scandal, which occurred on Christmas Day, 1951. 5 cops were ultimately convicted of physically abusing citizens. In the episode that followed, which first aired on the radio in March of 1952 and then later on television in April of 1958, Dragnet approached this controversy by offering viewers a scenario, a counter-narrative, in which every abuse exposed by the press is challenged.
You're a detective sergeant. You're assigned to Personnel Division. A resident of your city files a report of assault and battery. His shoulder is dislocated. He's been badly beaten. He claims his assailant was a young police officer. Your job? Investigate.
Comparison proves Fatima quality.
Yes, comparison proves Fatima quality.
Compare Fatima with any other king-size cigarette.
1. Fatima's length filters the smoke 85 millimeters for your protection.
2. Fatima's length cools the smoke for your protection.
3. Fatima's length gives you those extra puffs, 21% longer than standard cigarette size.
And you get an extra mild and soothing smoke, plus the added protection of Fatima quality.
Definitely the best quality in its class, but the same price as the cigarette you are now smoking.
Prove Fatima quality yourself today. Buy Fatima in the bright, sunny yellow pack. Best of all, king-size cigarettes.
Dragnet, the documented drama of an actual crime. For the next 30 minutes, in cooperation with the Los Angeles Police Department, you will travel step by step on the side.
Investigating charges against a police officer involves exactly the same procedure as cases where private citizens are concerned. Prove the suspect innocent or guilty. If Blanchard was innocent, it wasn't going to be an easy job proving it. If he hadn't beat up the complainant, George Evans, and dislocated his shoulder, it seemed the only way out would be to find the man who did. Either that or prove that the two witnesses Evans had come up with were lying. If Blanchard was guilty, if he actually had slugged and beaten Evans, we had to find sufficient evidence and we had to find a motive. 11:10 a.m. Ed and I took Officer Harry Blanchard over to the 11:50 a.m. Ed and I continued questioning Eleanor Rowland. The more we talked to her, the more we were convinced that at the time of the alleged beating, she was under a heavy dose of narcotics, and that for the most part, she'd picked up her version of the story from the alleged victim, George Evans.
Get that cop convicted. If it's the last thing I do, you can count on that.
What's the matter, Evans? All we did was ask you a simple question.
Don't try to kid me, Sergeant. I got the angle. You're trying for a cover-up. Okay, go ahead and try.
Now, look, why don't you snap out of it, mister? Nobody's trying to cover up unless it's you. Sherman and the girl are your witnesses. Some of the points of their stories don't check out. We want to clear them up. Does that sound unreasonable?
Sergeant Friday himself implicitly criticizes press coverage by situating it within the much more important investigation being conducted by the police themselves. Take this narration, for example.
June 15th, 10 a.m. The investigation continued. Meantime, the newspapers were still making front-page material out of the story. One of the morning banner lines read, "Cop slugs cripples citizen to get payoff," and another one, "Police brutality rouses entire city." Our investigation went on. Early Saturday afternoon.
The result is an episode that twists a real instance of police officers actually being convicted of legitimate misconduct, a rare enough thing in our justice system, and turns it into a pretzel of story-crazed journalists versus the dutiful cops just trying to get at the truth. Meanwhile, in the episode The Big Ruling, Dragnet dealt with the 1955 California Supreme Court case, The People versus Calhoun. Basically, the LAPD had charged a dozen men with illegal gambling, but their evidence had been obtained largely via illegal means, including illegally bugging the homes of various suspects with the express permission of Chief Parker. Additional evidence was also obtained via forced entry and without any judicial warrants, which officers admitted to in court at the time without fear of reprimand or censure. They thought this was just normal procedure. The court ultimately found that this violated the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. As the court majority put it, the protections of the Constitution, quote, contemplate that it is preferable that some criminals go free than that the right of privacy of all the people be set at naught. Chief Parker was one of the most vocal critics of this decision, for he thought that it impeded the ability of cops to do their jobs. In a January 1956 speech, possibly written by Roddenberry, he said, quote, "In the vast majority of cases, the machinery of law enforcement is activated by the affirmative exercise of the powers and duties of a police officer. Yet the lowly police officer is told, by this decision, in effect, that his actions will be justified or condemned in a piecemeal fashion, as the facts of each particular case come before a high court of this state. It is my contention that this is an unfair burden to place upon those whose sole objective is the protection of the people against the vast predatory criminal army that exists in this country today. Less than 6 months after the court handed down its decision, Dragnet released The Big Ruling. Radio, September 6, 1955. Television, January of 56.
You're a detective sergeant. You're assigned to narcotics detail. You get a report that a supply of heroin has reached your city. You don't know who's got it or where it is. Your job, find out.
This episode presented a set of circumstances in which a reasonable search was ultimately declared illegal. In other words, it contrived a scenario in which the court's decision actively impeded the ability of the police to bring an obviously guilty perpetrator to justice.
Something wrong with this case?
I don't know yet.
Well, Free himself said it might not stand up. We figured he was just talking.
Yeah.
We got the H, the stolen sweaters. What more do you need?
Let me ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
And give me the same answers you'd give in court if you were under oath.
All right.
Free was beside this car when you stopped him, is that right?
That's right.
Did you place him under arrest before you searched him? Well, did you?
Well, not in so many words.
What do you mean?
Well, we knew he was a hype. He knew we were cops. He could have figured that out.
But you didn't say you're under arrest in those words.
No, I don't think I did.
Smith?
Well, Don, we didn't have anything to arrest him for, not until after we found the H.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any reason to suspect he was carrying dope?
Well, like I said, he's a user.
Yeah.
That he was in the neighborhood. We knew somebody around there was carrying.
Well, then you weren't looking for Free in particular.
Well, no.
The way I get it, the burglary hadn't been reported yet, is that right?
That's right.
So finding the sweaters was a surprise.
Yeah, it sure was.
Well, we'll file on him. It may not stick.
What are you talking about, Don?
The evidence.
Well, what's wrong with it?
The way you got it.
What?
You heard about the exclusionary ruling, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, Skipper had an assembly on it.
Well?
Look, Don, we're not lawyers. We're cops.
Sure. Well, here's the way it operates. Evidence obtained by illegal search or seizure can be thrown out of court. Simple as that.
Yeah?
Federal government has the same ruling. Most of the states don't. We never have until now. Before, if a policeman committed an illegal search or seizure, he could be prosecuted. Lots of times he was.
Uh-huh.
But the evidence could still be used at the suspect's trial.
Yeah.
Doesn't work that way anymore.
No?
Well, look, maybe I'm just thick, Don, but it seems to me the only guy who's better off's the criminal.
That's how I see it, too.
Now, this episode prompted some rather severe public backlash. Paul Zephyrin, a powerhouse in California Democratic circles at the time, sent a telegram to Webb accusing the producer of trying to sidestep the law of the land by appealing directly to TV viewers. And New York Post columnist J. Nelson Tuck charged NBC with, quote, lending its national facilities to one of its top-rated dramatic programs for an emotion-packed, completely one-sided attack on the U.S. Constitution. Now, in order to ensure that the ideological messaging of episodes like these affected as many people as possible, the producers distributed them far beyond the confines of broadcast signals. They didn't just air over the radio or the television. Judges played them in court to deter teenagers from delinquency. Episodes were sent upon request to the U.S. military, the CIA, the National Safety Council. Even individual schools, police departments, and community groups used them to try and communicate particular messages to their communities. One episode that was especially popular with community groups was the Big Trio, which centered on traffic safety.
It was Thursday, July 3rd. It was warm in Los Angeles. We were working the night watch out of traffic division, accident investigation. My partner's Frank Smith. The boss is Deputy Chief Caldwell. My name's Friday. I was on the way back from the scene of the accident, and it was 9:42 p.m. when I got to Georgia Street Receiving Hospital, second floor, treatment room 5.
Joe?
Hi. How's it going?
Not too good.
How are they?
Bad, all four of them. Girl who was riding in the front seat, both legs crushed.
Oh, no.
Talking to Doc Hall, nothing he can do. Gonna have to amputate.
That's a shame. All the parents been notified?
Yeah, they're on their way down now. Cigarette?
Yeah, thanks.
I got a match.
All right, thank you.
Still touch and go with the kid who was driving, the Wheeler boy. Doc doesn't give him much of a chance.
Possible to get a statement from him?
No, still unconscious. They get pictures of the wreck, all right?
Yeah, they did. The car the kids were in laid down 207 feet of skid marks. From the condition of the car, it's a wonder any of them are alive. Not a straight piece of metal in the wreck, Frank. How about that couple in the sedan they sideswiped?
Doctor isn't sure. Both have internal injuries. Woman's right leg is fractured. Man has a possible concussion. Lousy thing.
Every one of them's old enough to know better. What made them think they could get away with it?
According to Webb's own testimony, he received some 4,000 letters after it aired on television, and NBC itself was actually quite aware of the episode's potential to impact audience behavior, declaring in its affiliate promotional material, sent out right before the 4th of July holiday weekend, quote, "This special Dragnet theme can be instrumental in saving lives in your community, as in other communities wherever Dragnet is seen." In this way, the dutiful professional procedures of Dragnet seeped into the minds of millions of people, even those that did not themselves watch TV or listen to the radio. As the historian Joe Domanick summarized in 1994, quote, "When the NYPD was portrayed on TV, its officers would be shown as mentally and physically disheveled, cynical, and weary men and women burned out from dealing with all that New York dirt and grit. Parker and Sheldon of the LAPD had been smarter with Dragnet. Within a few years, it had gained enormous fame for Bill Parker and the kind of favorable, almost gushing publicity for his department that money could not buy." So Dragnet intentionally communicated a positive, pro-institution message to the American public. That leaves the question, was this propaganda campaign effective? Just because it was widespread doesn't mean it worked. And as we've mentioned previously, media effect is impossible to measure with any kind of precision, both because effect can mean different things to different people, and because deciding which of an infinite number of variables actually had a meaningful impact on a person's thoughts or actions is remarkably difficult. We can catch glimpses, however, of Dragnet's potential impact in the historical record. Certainly many commentators at the time thought that the show was changing how the police were viewed in the popular imagination. In 1954, for instance, Time magazine happily pointed to what it saw as the positive impact Dragnet had had upon the popular perception of the police officer. The show had helped to turn what Time referred to as a nation of incipient cop haters right around. Quote, "The country has gained a new appreciation of the underpaid, long-suffering, ordinary policeman, and has gained its first rudimentary understanding of real-life law enforcement." Officials also seem to have felt that the show not only presented the police positively, but by doing so had had an appreciable impact on public perceptions. In late 1954, the Fraternal Order of Police voted at their national convention to award Webb a plaque engraved in silver as a token of their appreciation. In 1956, the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners awarded a citation to Webb, declaring that his show, quote, "engendered increased respect for law enforcement and greatly enhanced public esteem for the police profession." Even politicians praised the show. In 1954, Democratic Representative Sam Yorty declared into the congressional record that, quote, "Dragnet has taught millions of people a better understanding of law enforcement and respect for law enforcement's honest agents." It does also seem to be the case that voters increasingly favored the police, at least if they are to be judged by the budgetary priorities of their representatives. We saw in a prior episode, for instance, how Bernard Caldwell's California Highway Patrol successfully positioned itself as the primary solution to the crisis of California's traffic deaths in the 1950s, with press editorials and legislators largely on his side. And the California state budget yielded a larger and larger share of itself to this police fiefdom. Likewise with the LAPD. For the 1949 to 50 fiscal year, the LAPD's portion of the Los Angeles budget stood at about $22 million. A decade later, it had exploded to $43.9 million, a solid doubling of Parker's resources. And for the inflation curious, $1 in 1950 was still worth $1.23 in 1960, so this increase wasn't just eaten up by some inflationary trend. While we can't say for sure whether or how much Dragnet affected this political shift, the fact that the show so dominated the popular imagination of the 1950s in a way that few properties ever have makes it hard for me to believe that Webb's creation had no effect on the popular imagination. Yet we should be a little bit cautious, careful not to overestimate Dragnet. Like with any analysis of the effect media has on people, it might just boil down to both and. It's true both that Dragnet provided millions of viewers week after week with a consistent portrait of policing as the LAPD wanted it to be presented, and that popular perceptions of police among large swaths of the mostly white working class may have been growing more conservative already, as affluence increased after World War II. The effect, therefore, could have been mutually reinforcing. Dragnet's immense popularity may have been caused partly by the conservative shift among many viewers, and the cultural power that resulted from this initial popularity might have helped bolster an idealized notion of policing among viewing audiences and then the wider public. Even if we can't really know Dragnet's direct impact on popular attitudes, it is undeniable that the show jump-started the LAPD's propaganda apparatus. Sailing on the gusty winds of the show's national success, by the mid-1950s, Parker's LAPD had found its public relations footing. The Information Division, helmed by Captain Stanley Sheldon, had 20 employees all to itself. As summarized by historian Joe Domanick, quote, "They fed their stories not only to the local papers, but through Southern California. Not just big ones, but Black and Hispanic newspapers and radio stations, and the 150 throwaway weekly newspapers. They clipped stories both for the Intelligence Division and for their own use from magazines all over the country. They had a motion picture unit. They scheduled the full-time police band, which made promotional appearances all over the region. They read the scripts for multiple shows. They had a speakers bureau, which matched requests for speakers from the department to just the right people. They wrote most of Bill Parker's speeches. They had promotional programs in the schools and with organizations like the American Legion. They published their own magazine, The Beat, put out in glossy, colored annual reports. Their TV work included more than just Dragnet. They put Parker himself on a local show, The Thin Blue Line, where he answered questions from the public. They created propaganda films about the department, highlighting the construction of the new headquarters or broadcasting a 5-minute bulletin about wanted persons. The new headquarters even had a room specifically set aside that was an exact replica of Parker's office, just in case they had to film him a speech or a press conference. Actress Betty White even hosted a show 5 days a week where the LAPD showed photographs of missing children. Parker and his information office had, by this point in the late 50s and early 60s, grown so confident as to pressure not just an individual producer or singular TV network, but the Motion Picture Association of America, aka Hollywood itself. Reacting to what it perceived to be a slate of upcoming anti-cop movies, the LAPD's Information Division wrote to Jeffrey Sherlock, the MPAA's director, to see what could be done about these films. Sherlock replied to the LAPD deferentially, quote, "I trust we will not have too many scripts dealing with policemen as antagonists. So far you are acquainted with all that have been submitted to this office. In the last few months, I've made 3 public addresses on the work of the Hays Production Code. In all of them, I took time out to compliment the Los Angeles Police Department on the assistance they are giving the Hollywood motion picture industry in avoiding offense in this respect." In the coming decades, the LAPD would cease to castigate Hollywood like this and start working with the entertainment industry even more closely, developing relationships with more than 20 television shows, everything from the Mod Squad and the Blue Knight to SWAT and T.J. Hooker. For 25 consecutive seasons of television, at least one show involving the LAPD remained on network television. Today, The LAPD, along with its major eastern cousin, the NYPD, have between them created the very police empire that Roddenberry discounted as mere paranoid fantasy. In 2024 alone, the LAPD was working with more than a dozen separate productions: fictional television, reality TV programs, script consulting, movies, the works. So what conclusions can we reach thus far as we close out this part of Webb's career? Well, first I want to reiterate that my position is not that Webb was some kind of one-dimensional sycophant of the LAPD devoid of any creative inspiration of his own. He seems genuinely to have believed not only that police work was important, but that it was intrinsically dramatic as well. These were stories that he thought needed to be told for the good of society, but happily from his point of view, they were also interesting enough that they deserved to be told, too. Moreover, while Webb and Parker were partners in propaganda, their interpersonal relationship does not seem to have been all that smooth. This could have come down to simple jealousy on Parker's part. As one paper noted in 1952, during the previous year's convention of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, quote, "More times than not, Parker was greeted as Sergeant Friday instead of Chief Parker." The fictional Friday, it seemed, had gained more notoriety than the flesh and blood Parker, or at least he may have felt that way. And the question of ego could have hit both ways. In an internal FBI memo talking about Webb and Parker, Assistant Director of Crime Records Cartha DeLoach noted, quote, "I was quite amused over Webb's bitterness towards Chief of Police Parker of Los Angeles. He stated that in the Dragnet series, he had had constant trouble with Parker and often had to refuse filming productions that Parker insisted on Webb producing. He specifically mentioned that Parker had been interested in blowing up his own name. According to Webb, there is little love lost between Webb and Parker." Further documentation on the true relationship between Webb and Parker has not been forthcoming, but there are hints at animosity, and these are worth noting if only as a reminder that even two men with broadly aligned ideological commitments can have serious, perhaps even catastrophic disagreements. Conservatism is not a monolith, and we'll see this come up again when Webb tried to work with another conservative ego, J. Edgar Hoover, and his FBI. Despite these personal disagreements, it is undeniable that Dragnet helped shape the ideological lens through which many in the U.S. saw the world of crime and criminality. As summarized by Claudia Calhoun, the show really did set the tone for our national understanding of the police. Quote, "Dragnet contributed in significant ways to the context in which audiences interacted with the criminal justice system. It even sometimes became a means through which the criminal justice system articulated its expectations of its citizens. Because of Dragnet's commitment to its form of storytelling, if you believed the show's claims, then simply listening or watching the show was an education in the real work of the police. At its height then, up to 40 million Americans took part in 30 minutes of civic education on a weekly basis, learning from Dragnet how the criminal justice system worked." I don't think Webb could have asked for a better legacy than this: to be considered an educational anchor, a social bedrock, plus an artistic and commercial success to boot. But Webb wasn't even 40 when Dragnet aired its last episode in August of 1959. He had plenty of career left in him, and plenty more police stories to tell. We'll get to them in good time, but first, we'll have to see about an up-and-coming producer named Quinn Martin and his work over at the ABC network. More on that next time. Thanks for listening to this week's episode covering the political legacy of Dragnet. Sources are in the show notes below. You can find an essay version of this script, complete with detailed citations, on my Substack, substack.com/OwenSimes. You can also find me on Blue Sky, Owen-Simes, YouTube at Integral History, and you can check out my book, He Was Our Man in Washington, History of the Obama Years. Music by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. See you next time.